The sharp beeping of the heart monitor echoed through the sterile halls of St. Mercy Hospital, growing louder with each passing second, yet there was no one left in the room to hear it. The patient, an elderly woman, had been admitted just 2 days ago, a routine case, or so it seemed. Her sudden, unexplained death had left the doctors and nurses baffled. There was no sign of trauma, no obvious cause. Yet she was gone. Detective Sara Thompson had seen her fair share of strange cases, but this one was different. It wasn't the patient's death alone, but the circumstances surrounding it. The hospital had brushed it aside as a natural cause, but Sara wasn't convinced. There was something in the air, a whisper that told her something darker was at play. "Something doesn't add up," Sara muttered as she walked through the hospital's entrance, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent building. Her K-9 partner, Shadow, a sharp-eyed German shepherd, trotted silently beside her. His eyes flickered as they entered the hospital, already on alert. Sara looked down at her dog, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The air was thick with a strange mixture of antiseptic, fear, and something else she couldn't place. "Let's see what you can find, Shadow," she whispered, though she didn't expect him to understand her words. The dog, however, was an expert in reading the unspoken. His focus sharpened as they moved deeper into the hospital, each step taking them closer to uncovering the truth. Inside the hospital, Sara felt the tension. She noticed the nervous glances exchanged between staff members. The doctors were on edge. Something had happened here, something that had been hidden from the public eye, and Sara was determined to find it. Shadow, sensing her determination, led her toward the ward where the most recent death had occurred. As they passed through the hallways, the dog's behavior became more focused. He sniffed the air, his ears standing up, and his eyes darted from one door to the next. But it wasn't until they reached room 112 that his reaction changed. Shadow stopped in front of the door, his body stiffening. Sara placed a hand on his head. "You've found something, haven't you?" The nurse behind the counter gave Sara a polite smile, but offered no help when asked about the patient. She was a routine case, the nurse said dismissively, though her eyes flickered nervously. Just a heart condition. Sara didn't believe her. There was something in the nurse's voice that didn't match the words. She wasn't being honest. "I'd like to see her records," Sara requested, keeping her tone professional but firm. The nurse hesitated, then reluctantly handed over file. As Sara opened it, she quickly scanned the contents. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but as she continued reading, something caught her eye. The medication prescribed was unfamiliar. It wasn't something Sara had seen before, at least not in a hospital like this one. "Neuromed," she read aloud, narrowing her eyes. "What is this?" The nurse shifted nervously. "It's a new drug, a trial, but—" Before she could finish, Shadow let out a low growl, and Sara immediately turned her attention to the dog. Shadow was staring at the hallway, his eyes narrowed, his focus unshakable. It was as if he was sensing something that Sara couldn't see. "Tell me more about this trial," Sara said, her voice now more commanding. She wasn't going to leave without answers. The nurse hesitated, her face pale. It's supposed to help with pain management, but the administration is pushing it. They want to use it on more patients, even though it hasn't been fully approved." Sara's gut told her this wasn't just a bad decision. It was a cover-up. She needed to know more, but she wasn't getting anything else from the nurse. Shadow led her down the hallway to the elevator. Sara pressed a button for the basement. If there was one place that might hold the key to uncovering the truth, it was down there. The hospital's basement was a labyrinth of old storage rooms and maintenance areas. Few people ever ventured down there, and even fewer had the clearance to access the rooms where drugs were stored. As the elevator descended, the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with the scent of chemicals. Shadow's behavior grew even more intense. He was ready to find whatever was hidden in the dark corners of this place. The basement was poorly lit, its flickering bulbs casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Shadow immediately took the lead, his paws soft on the cold, concrete floor. Sara followed closely behind, her hand on her gun, though she knew she wouldn't need it. The truth was a far more dangerous weapon than any firearm could ever be. As they moved deeper into the basement, Shadow's focus grew more intense. He sniffed the air, his tail still. They passed rows of unmarked crates and industrial equipment, but Sara could sense that they were getting closer to something crucial. Then, just as they reached the far end of the basement, Shadow stopped in front of a heavy metal door. Sara crouched down, examining the lock. It was old but still secure. She didn't have a key, but with Shadow's help, she had found the first clue to the truth. She pulled out her phone and called in backup. They needed to get inside. While waiting for the authorities to arrive, Sara examined the door more closely. There was a faint smell, something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't just dust and old storage. No, this was something different. The backup arrived in minutes, and they quickly gained access to the room. As the door creaked open, the smell hit them. It was a mixture of chemicals, something metallic, and a sickly sweet odor that Sara couldn't place. Inside, they found shelves lined with vials. But it wasn't the vials themselves that made Sara's stomach drop. It was the labels. The same drug from the patient records, Neuromed. But there was something even more disturbing. Several files were tucked beneath the vials, each containing patient names and detailed records. Names of people who had died under mysterious circumstances. Her heart raced as she flipped through the papers. It was worse than she had imagined. The deaths weren't just coincidences. They were part of a hidden cover-up, one that reached to the highest levels of the hospital. Sara turned to one of the officers, her voice low but urgent. "Get these to the lab. We need to know exactly what's in this." Shadow sat beside her, his eyes scanning the room. They had found the truth, but the investigation was far from over. It didn't take long for the lab results to confirm what Sara had feared. Neuromed wasn't just unapproved, it was dangerous. The drug had severe side effects, including heart failure, which explained the sudden deaths of patients. But there was more. Neuromed was being administered to patients under guise of a new treatment for pain, though it had never been cleared for human use. The final piece of the puzzle was clear. The hospital's medical director, Dr. William Hart, had been orchestrating the entire operation. He had been pushing the drug on patients for years, knowing full well the risks, all to line his pockets and save the hospital's failing finances. Sara knew it was time to confront him. She had the evidence. She had the truth. Now, all she needed was to bring him to justice. Dr. Hart's office was the epitome of power. Polished wood, expensive furniture, and a view of the city that screamed success. But to Sara, it was just a facade. Beneath it all was a man who had allowed countless people to die for the sake of money. When Sara entered his office, Hart was sitting behind his desk, reading through some papers. He didn't even look up. "Detective Thompson," he said, his voice smooth, "I assumed you'd come eventually, but you don't know what you're up against." Sara didn't waste any time. "I know exactly what I'm up against, Hart, and you're going to pay for what you've done." Hart's face twisted into a sneer. "You have no idea what it takes to keep a hospital running. The pressures, the expectations. You think you can just waltz in here and accuse me of murder? I've saved lives." Sara stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Not anymore. You've been selling death to your patients, and now it ends. The drug, the cover-up, everything. It's over." Shadow stepped forward, his growl low and threatening. The dog's presence, though silent, spoke volumes. Hart hesitated, his gaze flicking between Sara and the dog, before his eyes darted to the cabinet beneath his desk. It was too late. Sara had already found it. The truth had come to light, and the darkness of St. Mercy Hospital's secrets could no longer be hidden. Dr. William Hart and his accomplices were arrested, and the hospital was put under full investigation. The truth, no matter how well hidden, had found its way into the open. Sara stood outside the hospital, the sun dipping below the horizon. She looked down at Shadow, who sat patiently at her side, his tail still as ever. "We did it, boy," she said softly, her voice filled with exhaustion, but also relief. "The truth's out now." The K9 dog had led her to answers no one else could see. It wasn't just the evidence of files. It was Shadow's instincts, his unwavering loyalty, and his ability to sniff out the truth no matter how deeply it was buried. As the authorities moved in, the hospital's shady dealings were exposed for all to see. Lawsuits were filed, and families who had lost loved ones finally had their answers. Justice, though delayed, had been served. But for Sara, the victory wasn't just in the arrests. It was in knowing that no matter how deep the darkness, there was always a way to uncover the light. And with Shadow by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. "Let's go, Shadow," Sara whispered as they turned away from the hospital, walking into the fading light of the evening. The city's secrets were no longer safe, and justice had been delivered. The truth had been uncovered. The weight of the investigation that had consumed Sara for days now seemed to lift, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had done right. The evening sun cast long shadows over the empty streets as Sara stood outside St. Mercy Hospital, the place that had been a symbol of corruption for so long. The air had cooled, the calm after the storm setting in, and yet the tension lingered like the final echo of a thunderstorm. Sara looked down at Shadow, her loyal companion. The German shepherd had been with her through thick and thin, from the first whiff of danger to the final confrontation with Dr. Hart. Now, the dog sat at her feet, still and calm, his fur ruffling slightly in the breeze. "We did it, boy," Sara whispered softly, more to herself than to the dog. "The truth's out now. It's over." The hospital had been exposed for what it was, a place of greed, where the lives of patients had been sacrificed for profit. But now, the doors would close for good, and the truth would be available to the world. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and the cover-up that had plagued St. Mercy for years would no longer remain in the shadows. Sara felt the weight of it all as she gazed at the hospital one last time. It had taken everything: her patience, her determination, her skill, and the unwavering loyalty of Shadow, but justice had been served. A few weeks later, the media storm that followed the hospital's closure had become a distant memory. The families of the victims had found closure. The medical staff who had been involved in the cover-up were being held accountable, and the hospital was no longer a symbol of corruption. But for Sara and Shadow, life had returned to some semblance of normalcy. Sara sat on the park bench, resting her hands on her knees as she watched the world around her. The peace of the park was a stark contrast to the chaos of the hospital investigation. Shadow lay beside her, head resting on his paws, watching the ducks in the pond with a quiet, almost meditative gaze. "You know, Shadow," Sara said, her voice thoughtful, "sometimes it feels like we're always chasing something. Something hidden, something dangerous. But there are moments like this, moments of peace where I can breathe again." She let the quiet moments settle in, the calm of the evening wrapping around her. She had learned so much during the investigation. The fragility of life, the importance of truth, and the undeniable bond between herself and her dog. They had gone through it all together. Sara looked down at Shadow, who had shifted his position to lie closer to her. She smiled, brushing her hand through his fur. "I don't know what I'd do without you, boy. You've always had my back." The sun finally dipped below the horizon, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink. For a brief moment, everything seemed right in the world. The storm had passed, and they had made it through, together. "Come on, Shadow," Sara said, standing up. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow's another day, and there's always another case waiting for us." As the two of them walked off into the twilight, the world felt quieter, more hopeful. Whatever the future held, they would face it together.